Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In this final episode, Ada uncovers a hidden, haunting truth about her family's bloodline and the pact that bound her to the darkness, leading her to confront the deepest, most perilous trial of her life, the ritual of blood. The village watches in tense anticipation as Ada faces an unimaginable decision, whether to sacrifice herself to break the curse or risk the village's safety. As the line between light and shadow blurs, a climactic battle ensues that shakes the village to its core. The story reaches a bittersweet conclusion that solidifies Ada's legacy and inspires generations, ensuring that her sacrifice and the strength she instilled in Ezi-Ora will endure, even as they remain vigilant for future shadows. The following days were tense. The figure's visit had left a mark on the village, and though the people tried to go about their lives as usual, there was an underlying sense of dread that no one could ignore. The elders, once so confident in their ability to guide the village, now found themselves questioning every decision, every action. And Ada, though she tried to remain strong, could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on her more heavily than ever before. One night, unable to sleep, Ada decided to visit the old records of the village, kept in a hidden chamber beneath the council hut. These records contained the history of Ezi-Ora, the stories of its founding, its triumphs, and its tragedies. Perhaps, she thought, there was something in these ancient texts that could help her understand the true nature of the darkness they faced. As she descended into the dimly lit chamber, the air grew cooler, and the smell of old parchment filled her senses. Shelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls and tomes, some so old that their edges crumbled at the slightest touch. Ada carefully selected a few of the oldest scrolls, hoping to find some clue, some forgotten piece of wisdom that could help her protect her people. Hours passed as she pored over the texts, her eyes growing weary from the strain. Most of what she found were accounts of past seasons, tales of battles won and lost, of the village's prosperity and hardship. But then, as she unfurled one particularly ancient scroll, she found something that made her blood run cold. The scroll told the story of the village's founding, but it was not the tale she had heard growing up. It spoke of a pact made by the first villagers, a pact with a being of great power and darkness. In exchange for protection and prosperity, the villagers had agreed to give something in return, something they had forgotten, or perhaps chosen to forget. A bloodline, Ada whispered, reading the words with growing horror. The pact required the bloodline of the village's leader to carry the darkness, to be a vessel for its power. She felt a wave of nausea as the realization hit her. The darkness had not just chosen her randomly, it had been passed down to her, a curse placed upon her family generations ago. And the figure that had visited the village was likely a manifestation of that original power, come to collect on the debt that was owed. Her mind raced. This curse, this forgotten pact, had been the true source of the darkness all along. It wasn't something that could be banished or defeated easily because it was bound to her bloodline. To end it, she would need to break the pact, but the scroll was frustratingly vague on how that could be done. As she sat in the silence of the chamber, Ada felt a despair unlike anything she had ever known. The weight of the truth was almost too much to bear. If she could not find a way to break the curse, the darkness would consume her, and through her, it would take the village. But there was another thought that frightened her even more, the possibility that the only way to break the curse might involve her own life, the ultimate sacrifice to end the darkness once and for all. Ada emerged from the chamber as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. The knowledge she now held was a heavy burden, and she knew that she could not keep it to herself. The village had to know the truth, even if it meant shattering the fragile peace they had managed to rebuild. As she walked through the village, the people greeted her as they always did, with warmth and respect, but now she could see the underlying fear in their eyes. They sensed that something was wrong, that the darkness had not been fully vanquished, and they looked to her for answers she was not sure she could give. Ada called a meeting of the council, and soon the elders and Mama Ngozi were gathered in the council hut. She explained what she had found in the old records, the truth about the pact and the curse that had been passed down through her bloodline. The elders listened in stunned silence, their faces pale with shock. Even Mama Ngozi, who had seen more than most, seemed at a loss for words. "So this is why the darkness has clung to you," Elder Okari said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It is not just an external force, it is a part of your very being, bound to you by blood." Ada nodded, her heart heavy. "Yes. And I fear that the only way to truly end this curse is to break the pact that was made all those generations ago. But I do not know how to do that, and I fear that the cost may be unbearable." The room was silent for a long time. Finally, Mama Ngozi spoke, her voice filled with sorrow. "Ada, you have done so much for this village, more than anyone could have asked. But if there is a way to break this curse, we must find it. We cannot let the darkness win." "But how?" Ada asked, her voice trembling. "The records were unclear, and I do not know what more I can do. The figure that visited us, it may hold the key, but I do not trust it." Elder Okari frowned, deep in thought. "There is an ancient ritual," he said slowly. "One that has not been performed in living memory." Elder Okari's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, seeping into the hearts of those gathered in the council hut. Ada could feel the weight of his suggestion before he even finished speaking. The gravity of what he was about to propose sent a shiver down her spine. "What ritual?" Ada asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could sense that whatever this was, it was going to change everything. Elder Okari hesitated, his eyes dark with memories of stories passed down through generations, stories that had always been too terrible to speak of openly. "The ritual of blood," he said at last, his voice low and grave. "It is an ancient rite, one that our ancestors only turned to in the most desperate of times. It requires a sacrifice of blood, blood that is bound to the curse, blood that is both innocent and guilty." Ada's heart skipped a beat. She knew without asking that this meant her. Her bloodline had been tied to the curse, and now it seemed that her blood would be the key to breaking it. "What does the ritual do?" she asked, already dreading the answer. Elder Okari's eyes met hers, filled with sorrow. "The ritual is meant to sever the bond between the curse and its vessel. It will require you to face the darkness within yourself, to confront it in its purest, most terrifying form. And then, you must offer your blood to the spirits, to cleanse the curse from your lineage." Mama Ngozi gasped, understanding the implication immediately. "Okari, this is too much. The ritual of blood is dangerous, it's been forbidden for generations because it could destroy the very soul of the one who performs it. But what other choice do we have?" Elder Okari countered, his voice strained with the weight of their situation. "If we do not act, the darkness will consume Ada, and through her, it will spread to the entire village. This may be the only way to stop it." Ada stood silently, her mind reeling. The ritual was more than just a test, it was a death sentence. If she failed, not only would she lose herself to the darkness, but her bloodline would be tainted forever, and the village would be lost. But if she succeeded, she didn't know if she could survive the process. "I will do it," Ada said finally, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "If this is the only way to save the village, then I will undergo the ritual of blood." Mama Ngozi shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "Ada, you don't have to do this. There must be another way. There isn't, Ada replied, her resolve hardening. The darkness is growing stronger every day. I can feel it inside me, clawing at my mind. If I don't do this, I will lose control, and the village will be lost. This is the only way to end it. Elder Okari nodded, though his expression was one of deep sorrow. The ritual must be performed at the next full moon, he said. You will need to prepare yourself, physically, mentally, then spiritually. The darkness will try to break you, to consume you before the ritual is complete. You must be stronger than it. Ada left the council hut with a heavy heart, knowing that the days ahead would be the most difficult of her life. The villagers, sensing that something momentous was about to happen, watched her with a mixture of fear and hope. They did not know the full extent of the danger she was about to face, but they trusted her to save them, just as she had before. The days leading up to the full moon were filled with a tense, almost unbearable anticipation. The air in the village seemed charged with energy, as if the very earth was bracing for the coming storm. The villagers went about their daily tasks in a daze, their minds preoccupied with the unspoken knowledge that something terrible was about to happen. Ada spent most of her time in seclusion, preparing herself for the ritual of blood. She fasted, meditated, and performed cleansing rituals under Mama Ngozi's guidance. But no matter how hard she tried, she could feel the darkness inside her growing stronger, feeding off her fear and doubt. At night, her dreams were plagued by visions of shadows and blood. She saw herself standing in a circle of fire, the darkness closing in on her from all sides. In these dreams, the figure from the forest, the one who had offered her power in exchange for her soul, would appear, whispering promises of salvation, of freedom from the burden she carried. But Ada refused to listen. She knew that the figure was a manifestation of the darkness, a final attempt to seduce her before the ritual. She steeled herself against its temptations, knowing that any weakness would be her undoing. On the night of the full moon, the village gathered in the sacred clearing, the same place where Ada had first faced the darkness. The air was thick with tension, and the villagers spoke in hushed tones, their faces pale with fear. They knew that whatever happened tonight would determine the fate of the village, and they could only hope that Ada would succeed. The ritual of blood required a sacred circle, drawn with the blood of a sacrificed animal. Mama Ngozi performed the sacrifice, her hands trembling as she drew the circle around the stone altar. The blood glowed in the moonlight, casting an eerie, crimson light over the clearing. Ada stood in the center of the circle, her heart pounding in her chest. She was dressed in a simple white robe, the same one she had worn for the purification ritual, but this time, the fabric felt heavy, as if it were weighed down by the gravity of what was to come. Elder Okari stepped forward, holding a ceremonial knife. Ada, once this ritual begins, there is no turning back, he said, his voice solemn. You must confront the darkness within you and offer your blood to the spirits. Only then can the curse be broken. Ada nodded, her resolve unshaken. I understand. With a deep breath, Elder Okari began to chant the ancient incantations, his voice rising and falling in a haunting melody that echoed through the clearing. The wind picked up, swirling around the circle, and the trees seemed to bend toward the center, as if drawn by the power of the ritual. As the chanting reached its climax, Ada felt the darkness within her stir, as if it had been awakened by the words. It surged through her veins, filling her with a cold, suffocating dread. The shadows around the clearing seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing like serpents, their black tendrils reaching out for her. Elder Okari handed the knife to Ada, his eyes filled with both fear and hope. You must do it now, before the darkness takes hold. Offer your blood to the spirits, and let them cleanse you of this curse. Ada took the knife, her hand trembling as she held it to her palm. She could feel the darkness fighting against her, trying to take control, to force her to drop the knife and give in to its will. But she fought back, using every ounce of strength she had left. With a quick, decisive motion, she cut her palm, letting the blood flow freely. As the first drops of blood hit the ground, the shadows recoiled, hissing in pain. The wind howled, and the earth beneath her feet began to shake. But the darkness did not retreat. Instead, it surged forward, more powerful than ever. Ada could feel it trying to pull her under, to drown her in its depths. The shadows swirled around her, forming a vortex of blackness that threatened to consume everything in its path. For a moment, Ada faltered, the weight of the darkness overwhelming her. She could feel it closing in, its cold fingers wrapping around her heart, squeezing the life out of her. The world around her began to fade, the chanting of the elders growing distant, as if she was sinking into an abyss. But then, out of the darkness, she heard a voice that was not her own, but one she recognized. It was her father, speaking to her from beyond the grave. "Ada, you are stronger than this," the voice said, filled with warmth and love. "You can defeat the darkness. You must." With renewed strength, Ada gripped the knife and drew a deep, jagged line across her arm, offering more of her blood to the spirits. The pain was excruciating, but it brought her back to reality, grounding her in the moment. The shadows around her screamed, the sound piercing through the night like 1,000 tortured souls. The wind howled, tearing through the trees with a fury that threatened to rip the very earth apart. But as Ada's blood continued to flow, the darkness began to weaken. The shadows thinned, their tendrils loosening their grip on her. The vortex of blackness slowed, its power waning as the spirits answered her call. And then, with a final, desperate cry, the darkness broke. The shadows exploded outward, dissipating into the air like smoke. The earth stopped shaking, and the wind died down, leaving the clearing in an eerie, unnatural silence. Ada collapsed to her knees, her body trembling from the effort. The knife fell from her hand, clattering to the ground as she gasped for breath. The villagers rushed to her side, their faces filled with awe and relief. "You did it," Mama Ngozi whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You broke the curse." But as Ada looked up at the sky, she knew that the battle was not yet over. As Ada knelt on the ground, her vision blurred and her breath ragged, the relief she felt was fleeting. Though the shadows had retreated, she could still sense the presence of something dark lingering just out of reach. It was as if the veil between the world of the living and the realm of shadows had been torn, leaving a thin, fragile barrier that barely held back the tide of darkness. The villagers, unaware of the danger still lurking, began to celebrate. They danced and sang, their voices filled with hope and joy, believing that the curse had been lifted once and for all. But Ada could not join in their jubilation. She could feel the pull of the darkness, a gnawing sensation that whispered of unfinished business, of a battle that was not yet complete. Mama Ngozi, sensing Ada's unease, knelt beside her. "What is it, Ada? What do you feel?" Ada shook her head, struggling to put the sensation into words. "It's not over, Mama. The darkness, it's still there, just beyond our reach. I can feel it, waiting, watching." The ritual wasn't enough. Elder Okari, overhearing their conversation, approached them with a furrowed brow. "What do you mean, Ada? The shadows are gone. You have broken the curse." Ada looked up, her eyes filled with a deep, haunting fear. "No, I only weakened it. The darkness is still bound to my bloodline, and it's searching for a way back. The veil between our world and the realm of shadows is thinner now. We are more vulnerable than ever." The elder's expression darkened as he realized the gravity of her words. "Then we are not safe. What must we do?" Before Ada could respond, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the clearing. The ground trembled beneath them, and the sky above began to darken, as if a storm were brewing. The villagers, sensing the shift in the air, stopped their celebrations and looked to the sky in fear. Suddenly, the ground beneath the sacred circle split open with a deafening crack, revealing a deep chasm filled with swirling black mist. The air grew cold, and a foul stench wafted up from the chasm, making the villagers gag and stumble back. From the depths of the chasm, a figure began to rise. It was the same figure that had visited the village before, cloaked in darkness, its eyes two burning coals of malevolent light. But this time, it was not alone. Behind it, dozens of shadowy figures began to emerge, each one more twisted and grotesque than the last. They clawed their way out of the abyss, their mouths twisted into sinister grins as they surrounded the clearing. The villagers screamed in terror, some fleeing into the forest, while others stood frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The shadowy figures advanced, their eyes glowing with an unholy light as they reached for the villagers with elongated, clawed fingers. Ada struggled to her feet, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. She knew that this was the darkness's final assault, a last desperate attempt to take control. If she failed now, the village would be lost. The leader of the shadowy figures, the one who had first offered her power, stepped forward, its voice dripping with mockery. "You thought you could defeat me, child? You are nothing but a vessel, a means to an end. Your blood has only made me stronger, and now I will take what is mine." Ada's mind raced, trying to think of a way to stop the onslaught. The ritual had weakened the darkness, but it had also opened the chasm, creating a direct link between the village and the realm of shadows. The only way to close it would be to sever the connection completely, by destroying the source of the darkness. She looked down at the knife still lying on the ground, its blade stained with her blood. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. The only way to end this was to destroy herself, to break the curse by ending the bloodline that had been tainted by the darkness for generations. Tears welled up in her eyes as she picked up the knife, the weight of the decision almost too much to bear. But she knew that there was no other way. If she didn't act now, the village, her home, her people, would be consumed by the darkness. Mama Ngozi, seeing the determination in Ada's eyes, rushed to her side. "Ada, no. There must be another way." Ada shook her head, her voice choked with emotion. "There isn't, Mama. This is the only way. I have to do this for all of you." Elder Okari stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "Ada, if this is truly the only way, then we will not stop you. But know that your sacrifice will not be in vain. Your name will be remembered for generations, and your spirit will guide us." Ada nodded, her tears flowing freely now. She turned to face the shadowy figures, who were now only a few feet away, their claws outstretched, ready to claim her. Ada remembered a short prayer she read in the scroll that would have God take her back without her having to harm herself. She quickly said the prayer and was gone before the darkness could claim her. The chasm beneath the sacred circle began to close, the swirling black mist dissipating as the connection between the realms was severed. The shadowy figures screamed in rage, their forms flickering and fading as they were pulled back into the abyss. The leader of the figures reached for Ada one last time, its eyes burning with hatred, but it too was dragged back into the chasm, its voice echoing through the clearing as it disappeared into the void. As the last of the shadows vanished, the chasm sealed shut, leaving the clearing in an eerie, unnatural silence. The sky cleared, and the full moon shone down on the village, its light pure and untainted. Ada fell to the ground, the knife still embedded in her chest. Her vision began to blur, the faces of the villagers fading into darkness. But she felt no fear, no pain, only a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. She had done what needed to be done, and the village was safe. As her life slipped away, she felt the presence of her father beside her, his voice soft and reassuring. "You did well, my daughter. You are free now." Ada closed her eyes, the faint smile on her lips as she took her final breath. The darkness was gone, and at last, she was at peace. The village of Ezi-Ora was bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun as the villagers gathered in the clearing where Ada had made her final stand. The air was thick with sorrow, but there was also a sense of relief, a burden lifted, a curse finally broken. Mama Ngozi knelt beside Ada's lifeless body, her hands trembling as she gently closed Ada's eyes. "You are the strongest of us all," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "May the spirits guide you to the afterlife, where you will know only peace." Elder Okari placed a hand on Mama Ngozi's shoulder, his own eyes filled with unshed tears. "Ada's sacrifice has saved us all. The darkness is gone, and the village is safe. We must honor her memory, not with tears, but with the life she has given us." The villagers gathered around, their faces solemn as they prepared to lay Ada to rest. They built a pyre in the center of the clearing, decorating it with flowers and the symbols of protection that Ada had fought so hard to preserve. As they worked, the sky remained clear, the air filled with the sweet scent of blossoms, a sign, they believed, that the spirits had accepted Ada's sacrifice. As the flames consumed the pyre, the villagers stood in silence, watching as the smoke rose into the sky. It was not just a farewell, it was a promise. A promise that they would never forget the girl who had given everything to protect them, who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, even at the cost of her own life. The village of Ezi-Ora would rebuild, stronger and more united than ever before. They would tell the story of Ada, the girl who had saved them, to their children and their children's children. And they would remember that, even in the darkest of times, there is always a light, the light that shines through the darkness, guiding them to safety. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the villagers felt a renewed sense of hope. The darkness had been banished, and in its place, a new beginning had dawned. The village would thrive, its people free from the curse that had plagued them for generations. And though Ada was gone, her spirit lived on in the hearts of those she had saved. The light of dawn would always remind them of her sacrifice, and they would honor her memory with every breath they took. The darkness was gone, and the light had returned. Ezi-Ora was free. But the elders, including Mama Ngozi and Elder Okari, knew that they could not become complacent. Though the darkness had been banished, the memory of it lingered, a reminder that evil could return if they were not vigilant. They made it their mission to ensure that the village remained strong, united, and prepared for any threat that might arise. In honor of Ada's sacrifice, the villagers established a tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, they would gather in the sacred clearing where she had made her final stand. They would light candles and place them around the site of the chasm, which had long since healed over, now covered with soft grass and wildflowers. The candles, glowing brightly in the night, symbolized the light that Ada had brought to their lives, a light that would never be extinguished. The villagers would spend the night in the clearing, sharing stories of Ada's bravery and the battles she had fought to protect them. It was a night of remembrance, but also a night of gratitude and hope, a celebration of the life that had been given so that they might live in peace. As the years turned into decades, the village continued to prosper, but they never forgot the lessons they had learned. The elders passed down the knowledge of the ritual of blood, the dangers of the darkness, and the importance of standing together in the face of fear. Each new generation was taught to be vigilant, to protect the light that Ada had fought so hard to preserve. And so, Ezi-Ora remained a beacon of hope in a world that could still be dark and uncertain. The villagers lived in harmony with the land, their hearts strong and their spirits unbroken. They knew that the darkness could return, but they also knew that, with the strength and unity that Ada had instilled in them, they would be ready. As the centuries passed, the legend of Ada grew, her story told in villages far beyond Ezi-Ora. She became a symbol of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person's courage could make all the difference. And in the sacred clearing, where the villagers continued to gather every year, the spirit of Ada watched over them, the silent guardian, ensuring that the darkness would never again take hold. She had given her life to save her people, and in doing so, she had ensured that the light would always shine, no matter how deep the shadows. The village of Ezi-Ora would never forget her, and as long as they remembered, the light would never fade. The eternal vigil would continue, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of sacrifice. And as long as the candles burned in the clearing, Ada's legacy would live on, an undying flame in the heart of the village she had loved so dearly.